Welcome to this introductory deep water event. My name is Johnny and I'm part of a small group of Midlands rebels that started the Deep Water project in late 2020. Deep Water is an outreach project whose aims are to help people make the connection between global heating and extreme flooding, and thereby to recruit more rebels to press our government to tell the truth and act now on the climate and ecological emergency. Shortly, Linda will take you through a PowerPoint talk that explains all the science and how deep water is structured and organized. The purpose of this talk, which is aimed at people already involved in Extinction Rebellion, is to inspire you to get involved in making deep water a success, because we need your help. We need your energy, your ideas, and your time. In addition to this, specifically for XR Rebels talk, we have produced a version that is for non-XR audiences, be they flood action groups or gatherings of the general public. Before we go to the talk, I'm now going to pass you to Kim, who will lead you through a short regen piece.
Thank you, Johnny. An emotional support message for rebels. As XR rebels, we are the frontline workers of the climate crisis. We face the truth and raise ourselves up to act. We know our journey ahead is long and tumultuous. We know that as we face the challenges, we will encounter a roller coaster of emotions. Many of these we may manage on our own. Some we'll share with family or friends. Other emotions will be beyond self-care or casual sharing. As we face the multiple issues of the climate crisis, we never know what particular moment, image, piece of information, or event will trigger a tsunami of emotion. But in the ever-changing landscape of rebellion, there is a constant. And that constant is, as an XR rebel, you are not alone. XR is a caring community, and rebel welfare is embedded in our rebellion culture. It is who and what we are. So when that towering wave of emotion envelops you and you need support, reach out. The screen shows 2 contacts for support. Rebel to Rebel is an active listening safe place to talk on the phone about and express anything that is important to you. Or Climate Psychology Alliance are volunteers with a psychology background, often specializing in grief and trauma counseling, and a desire to give professional support to those facing the climate crisis. Contact details for both are in the notes as well as on screen. Yes, the journey is long, the path often hard going, but you are not alone. Reach out. Someone will be there for you. And now for Linda and Deep Water.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome to Deep Water, where you will learn about flooding and how they are the consequence of the climate crisis. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that some of you may have experienced being flooded or know someone who has been flooded, and how devastating that can be. Your insight and experiences are valuable to us, and we hope that we can all work together to demand urgent action on the climate emergency, because this is the root cause of our extreme flooding. In this first part of the talk, we're going to concentrate on the human impacts of flooding in the UK. But it's important to remember that flooding has a devastating impact on people, wildlife, agriculture and food security across the whole globe, and that people in parts of the global south are bearing the brunt of extreme weather events, including devastating floods. And here in the UK, we are also experiencing more extreme flooding. A recent Met Office report warns that extended periods of heavy rain here are now 7 times more likely because of global heating than they were in 2013-14. Many global heating-driven extreme weather events, such as heat waves, heavy rainfall and coastal flooding, are highly likely to get more extreme, both in frequency and intensity. Hurricanes become stronger and more damaging as warmer oceans result in more powerful storms with higher wind speeds and bigger storm surges. The intensity of the most severe storms is projected to increase by the end of the century by 85% globally and 136% in the Atlantic basin. In addition, changes in the jet stream are causing storms to stall in one place, causing even greater devastation. If greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase, worldwide 340 million or more people living in coastal areas will be threatened by flooding by 2050. In the UK, the climate emergency expresses itself as flooding, catastrophic, life-threatening floods. Flooding can result from sea level rise and storm surges, reservoir collapse, river flooding, and flash flooding. But before we go any further, we're going to look what it's like to be flooded. And for anyone who hasn't had to deal with flooding firsthand, this part can be quite shocking, because flooding has deep and long-term impacts, repeated flooding even more so. Being flooded is a matter of survival. Everything about your life can be destroyed and disrupted, and it can take years to regain some semblance of normal. Some parts of your old life will be lost forever. Being affected by flooding is destructive, terrifying, and life-threatening. We're going to look at some of the impacts of flooding. The immediate impacts of flooding can include drowning through underestimating depth of the water, driving into water, and being swept away. Injuries from collapsed or unstable buildings and roads and debris in the water. Electrical injuries from damage but live power cables and infrastructure. Explosions from fractured pipes and storage tanks. For instance, propane spreads across the surface of the water and can spread flames. Hypothermia and failed infrastructure such as roads, bridges, rail, power, gas, clean water. Mid-term impacts include water contamination from sewage, chemical overspills from factories and farm effluents, carbon monoxide poisoning from trying to clean up your house using unventilated generators, house fires caused by candles, communicable diseases spread in emergency shelters, diseases from contaminated water, vector-borne diseases from stagnant water, respiratory diseases from mold in houses, and animal displacements, for example, rats. Longer-term impacts can include disability from injuries, not being able to get to treatment or infections, mental health problems, social disruption, such as crime and looting, disruption of infrastructure, for instance, to access amenities, to get to work or to school, poverty, house values down, uninsurable, and houses unsaleable, loss of cherished items and pets, cost and time it takes to repair homes, and loss of community. And don't forget that flooding can happen more than once. Add to that a fourfold increase in psychological distress and the suicide rate 13.8% higher than pre-disaster rates. This may be from physical health problems, personal losses, social disruption, and economic hardship. Imagine knowing that you've just been flooded and it's going to happen again and again. Let's just pause to take that in. This has probably been uncomfortable listening, because flooding is climate change in action. In the UK, extreme and prolonged rain is our equivalent of the horrendous forest fires and devastating droughts that we've seen in other parts of the world. We've followed those horrors on the news and failed to see our own. After all, rain's normal in the UK, isn't it? And the appalling thing is that this is entirely man-made. It's all connected. Drought, extreme rainfall, prolonged rainfall, extreme snowfall, rising sea levels, and stalled weather patterns. And now we're going to look at the truth about the climate and ecological emergency. The intensity of rainfall depends on how much water the air can hold at a given time. Rising air temperatures increases the evaporation rate, so our oceans release more water vapour into the air. An air can hold up to 7% more moisture for every 1 degree C of temperature rise. A 4 degree C rise in global temperatures would call floods to double in the UK, with an additional 1 million homes exposed to high-risk flooding. February 2020 was the UK's wettest February on record, in a series dating back to 1862. England, Wales and Northern Ireland all saw their wettest February on record, with Scotland seeing its second wettest. Overall, the UK had 209 millimetres of rain, which is 237% of the average for February. This exceeds the previous record of 193 millimetres set in 1990. Rainfall was more than twice the average, quite widely across the regions. Some areas, including Lancashire and West Yorkshire, recorded more than 3 times the average, and locally some areas saw more than 4 times a normal February rainfall. Dr. Mark McCarthy, head of the Met Office National Climate Information Centre, said, "We have seen a number of exceptionally wet winters in the last decade, and due to climate change, we expect UK winters to become wetter. Of the top 10 wettest winters, 4 have occurred since 2007 and 7 since 1990, while there's been a 17% increase in the total rainfall from extremely wet days. In just over a decade, we have now seen the UK's wettest February in 2020, April in 2012, June in 2012, November 2009 and December 2015. And now in the winter 2020-21, we have seen extreme flooding affect communities in many parts of Britain. What were recently regarded as rare flood events likely to occur once every 50 or 100 years are now becoming the new normal thanks to global heating." This is a map which shows the areas of England which are at risk of flooding. Flooding has always been an occasional part of life in such areas, but experts warn that climate change is worsening the situation. In early 2019, Environment Agency Chairwoman Emma Howard-Boyd said that some communities might eventually have to move entirely. "We can't win a war against water by building away climate change with infinitely high flood defences," she said. The calculations used by government officials compare the cost of flood defences with the value of what is being protected. To be funded, flood defences must avoid £8 of damage for every £1 spent. In practice, cities with dense populations and high economic values benefit, while rural areas with fewer homes and businesses do not. Damage to farmland is not factored in. Experts have warned that the UK faces an increased risk from more extreme and unpredictable weather owing to the climate emergency. More than 3,400 of England's high consequence flood assets, or control measures, defined as those where there is a high risk of life and property if they fail, were judged by the Environment Agency to be in such bad condition they were almost useless. On this slide, we're comparing the flood risk map to regional food production. One of the biggest impacts of flooding, which is likely to affect us all in the near future thanks to global food supply chains, is crop failure. Food production in the UK and globally has been affected over the past 30 years. While the food imported to the UK from overseas represents about 45% of our consumption, our own food security is now a big issue. The UK government website states, "If the soil is too wet, it can result in poor conditions for the crops to grow. When soil is well drained, then the oxygen, nutrients and trace elements that the plant needs are available." Some cereal yields in the UK have decreased by 38% in 2020 due to prolonged rainfall and flooding at the usual time of sowing in the spring, with consequent low germination, and prolonged and persistent heat towards the summer months. The proportion of fresh fruit and vegetables imported from climate vulnerable countries, those worst hit by climate breakdown, increased from 20% to 32% over the last 2 decades. I apologise for the blurred nature of this slide, but I can't find another. 1,264 landfill sites are located in coastal areas and estuaries at risk from erosion. 2,964 additional landfill sites are located in floodplains. Landfill sites before the mid-1990s had fewer or no restrictions about what rubbish could be dumped in them, and little is known about what they contain. But many were on the coast, and some were used to raise land levels and even as part of flood defences. Climate changes bring in higher sea levels and stronger storms, putting the old dumps at greater risk of being broken up. The Environment Agency assessed 2 landfill sites in Essex to find out the level of toxic pollutants in the waste they contained. It found large quantities of harmful metals such as lead and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which are carcinogenic. Perhaps there's one near you. The most unpredictable type of flooding is flash flooding. In the picture on the left, you can see that natural ground cover can allow 25% of rain to sink into the topsoil, 25% into the deep aquifers and water table, and 40% evaporates or is drawn into trees and transpired. Only 10% forms runoff and travels to our drainage systems. In built-up areas, where 75 to 100% of the surface is impervious, 10% is drawn into the ground, 30% evaporates, and 55% will run off, overwhelming our drainage systems and causing flash floods. This slide is about our coastal defences. There are 520,000 properties in England in areas at risk from coastal flooding, and 8,900 properties are in areas at risk of being lost through coastal erosion. The coastline is divided here on this map by coastal defence plans. It is estimated that the total value of assets at risk from coastal flooding to be around 120 to 150 billion pounds, though this is difficult to quantify. By 2080, 1.5 million properties, including 1.2 million homes, may be at risk of coastal flooding, with a further 100,000 at risk from coastal erosion. This also includes around 1,600 kilometres of road, 92 railway stations and 12 substations and nuclear power stations could be at risk from coastal erosion or flooding. Around 1,600 kilometres of road, 92 railway stations and 12 substations and nuclear power stations could be at risk from coastal erosion or flooding by 2100. The Carbon Brief says that these plans cannot be relied on to reduce the risks from coastal flooding and erosion. This is because they are not legally binding and contain unfunded proposals. Implementing current policies to protect England's coast would cost 18 to 30 billion pounds in total. We are in the worst of both worlds. We need an adult conversation about adaptation. On the one hand, defences are not funded, and on the other hand, people are not being informed about moving assets, losses, and relocation. Wetland areas in the form of fen, marsh, swamp, and bog have been devastated. 90% of England's floodplains no longer function properly, with 65% modified by agriculture, meaning they are now man-made, smoother surfaces. 9% have been lost to urban and suburban building development. 4% are now occupied by open water and 6% by semi-natural woodland and rough grassland. Only 0.5% is now natural or semi-natural wetland. And yet all wetlands are capable of sequestering and storing carbon through photosynthesis, accumulation of organic matter in soils, sediment, and plant biomass. So what's causing this extreme weather? Here's an illustration of what's happening in the Arctic. Normally snow and ice reflects the sun's radiation back into space. But according to NASA, the Greenland ice sheet is rapidly melting and has lost 3.8 trillion tonnes of ice between 1992 and 2018. The sea is darker than ice, so it absorbs the heat from the sun, prompting more ice melt and rising sea levels. This loop is why the Arctic is heating up much faster than the rest of the planet. The Greenland ice sheet contains enough stored water to raise sea level by more than 24 feet, or 7.2 metres, as it melts. How fast that will occur is one of the big unknowns for predicting the pace of sea level rise over the rest of the century. Glacier experts think the ice sheet was likely in balance in the decades leading up to 1990, but since then it has been losing ice mass at an accelerating pace. This image, adapted from the 2019 Arctic Report Card, shows month-to-month changes in Greenland ice mass from April 2002 to 2019. Each peak in the graph shows the snow mass gained during the winter, and each valley shows summer losses through surface melting and glacier thinning and retreat. The 17-year trend is estimated to raise sea levels by nearly 12 millimetres, or half an inch. And this is why it matters. The albedo effect is the ability of a surface to reflect the sun's rays. And here you can see that snow reflects 90%, soil 40%, and the ocean 10% of the sun's rays. Normally, snow and ice reflects the sun's radiation back into space, but as it melts, the darker soil and ocean absorbs the heat, and this causes rising surface and sea temperatures and more ice melt. According to NASA, the Greenland ice sheet has lost ice the area of the size of France. This warming narrows the temperature difference between the Arctic and lower latitudes. And this is crucial because it's the temperature gradient between them that drives the jet stream, which is a wind which streaks around the poles at up to 250 miles per hour and at about 8 kilometers above the surface. The jet stream forms a boundary between the cold north and the warmer south, but the lower temperature difference means the winds are now weaker, and this means the jet stream meanders more, with big loops bringing warm air to the frozen north and cold air to the warmer south. Researchers say the changes mean the loops can remain stuck over regions for weeks rather than being blown westwards as in the past. This blocking effect means extreme events can unfold, such as conveyor belt storms. Climate projections predict that the type of rainfall will change. Winter rain will come from higher intensity frontal events, and summer rain will come from short-lived high intensity rain. High intensity rain is harder for our infrastructure to cope with. Sea level rise is driven by ice melt and the expansion of the seawater as its temperature increases. This graph shows NASA satellite observations of sea level rise. Global sea level rise is accelerating incrementally over time rather than increasing at a steady linear rate as previously thought. Even if we drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions now, staving off 2 degrees C of warming, global average sea levels could still rise by 2 to 3 feet, 30 to 60 centimetres above current levels by 2100. Higher sea levels give storm surges a higher starting point, increasing their size and their reach when they make landfall. Here's an image that shows how high tides and storm surges magnify the risk of sea level rise. The UK is one of the most vulnerable European countries to sea level rise. 69% of our GDP is located within 50 kilometres of the coast, and 78% of the country's population live within this zone. At present, 414,000 people are exposed to sea level rise in the UK. Development on the coast has not always taken long-term sustainability into account. Natural environments that are resilient to change have been altered by the construction of hard coastal defences. Many coastal communities are particularly vulnerable because populations in coastal areas are often poorer and older than the average in the UK. The reality is that we currently have 1.1 degrees C of warming. Our record temperatures and record floods are not anomalies. They are the beginning of a new norm. We are running out of time to reduce our carbon emissions fast enough to prevent much more damaging global temperature increases. This is still possible if the governments around the world act now with urgency, but they are failing us. 2020 was the first year that global emissions must drop by 7.6%, and by 7.6% again every subsequent year until 2030 in order to limit global temperatures to 1.5 degrees C, according to the 2019 Emissions Gap Report. And here's the truth. Here's a chart that shows our likely degree of warming against various scenarios. The large pink area at the top is where we would be if we have no climate policies. The orange, the second bar down, is where our current policies are taking us. The yellow, third bar down, are our pledges and targets. Even if our government was actually meeting its pledges and targets. As things currently stand, we are heading for 2.5 to 2.8 degrees C of warming. The lower two bars show the trajectory that we need to make to reach 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees C. For every year that we delay, that decline that we need to make is steeper. Since prehistory, rivers and seas have been part of our lives and shaped our communities. We settled at crossing places, traded and transported goods, fished, lived on rivers, travelled along them, and used them as places of leisure and sport. Rivers don't respect our political boundaries, or our political boundaries haven't respected our rivers. Floods, drought, pollution, flow with water, effluents from water treatment plants, factories, farmland runoff, industrial dredging all impact the health of the river downstream. Developments and alterations to water flow impact on communities downstream, and sea defences in one location can have significant impacts further along the coastline. A bioregional approach is a way of working with nature rather than historical and political boundaries. Normally, our nations and political boundaries have been shaped to feed huge, densely populated areas around cities where most humans live. We have built up a planetary civilization around the commercial flow of material goods that link one urban market with another, a tapestry of consumption that selects from the gentrification of cities and the degradation of landscapes by treating the productive yields of landscapes as commodities for globalized supply chains. Run this trajectory into the future and you can see the ecological crisis play out in its fullest grandeur. Climate change due to burning fossil fuels, land use practices, and advertising augmented rampant consumption. Collapse of global diversity accelerates. In an attempt to work with nature, we've decided to organise deep water by river basin catchment areas, and this is how it works. On the left, we have regions and counties, and on the right, we have river basin catchment areas. They don't exactly match. The UK is divided into river basin catchment areas, and there's a management body for each one. They may each be subdivided. Here's another go at orientating ourselves. On the left, we have river basin catchment areas in colour with the regions overlaid. And for reference, on the right is a map of regions of England with towns and cities marked. This is a work in progress. One of the key deep water roles that we're looking to fill is that of River Basin Coordinator, or Rebecca's. And they will be holding and sharing comprehensive knowledge, understanding and information of a catchment area and leading the deep water project in ways that embeds the understanding that global heating is the cause of extreme flooding in the minds of the public. So we're looking for people to take on that coordinating role and tailoring it to the river basin that they inhabit. These roles can be shared, but they are crucial. Our deep water objectives: to tell the truth about the climate and ecological emergency and help the public to connect extreme flooding and sea level rise with global heating, to demand that the government acts now to address this climate and ecological emergency and ameliorate the consequences of extreme flooding, to recruit new rebels and re-engage sleeping rebels with an issue that is on their doorstep, increase support for the CEE bill, and make the climate and ecological emergency and extreme flooding top issues in the 2021 super elections. This is how we propose that a deep water project could form itself within a river basin catchment area and still collaborate with our existing XR structures. Imagine the grey background is XR UK. On the right is a deep water project. Imagine arrows of collaboration connecting each of the groups within the deep water bubble. These groups can send a representative to deep water meetings to collaborate and connect. And what you can see there are the groups that we think that we need to focus on the deep water message. The larger bubble on the left represents a region, and we as Deep Water are a part of outreach. Deep Water will share actions, recruit rebels, offer talks, contribute to media output, and more within the region. They will also be able to access support, training, and develop skills from each of these groups using their abilities to disseminate information. Training and support is available to all rebels. The Rebellion Academy offers spokesperson training, facilitation training, action planning, action design, non-violent direct action training, know your rights, arrest support, media training, how to be an internal coordinator, mass mobilisation, and so on. So any person joining one of our groups would be encouraged to develop the skills necessary. Media and messaging, for example, are offering how to do live feed training, how to use Twitter training, and so on. So again, that support is available. And the Rebel Toolkit is where you can find all of XR's artwork, templates, designs, fonts, which are ideal for art and media and messaging. And if your group needs help and training, which isn't available, we can ask for it. We'll find it. As we plan our deep water actions, we need to retain our focus on our 3 demands. There are many local interested parties, including flood action groups, and demands for responses to prevent future floods can be controversial and simply shift the water along to the next community. Equally, large private projects may be thinly veiled investment opportunities. We need to demand action to turn the water off. And to do this, rebels need to help the public make that connection between climate change and our increasingly frequent and severe flooding events. This is our simple dilemma. You walk into your living room and find that it's flooded and your ceiling is about to fall in. Do you get a bucket or do you run upstairs and turn off the tap?
So, as you've seen, our vision is to use the reality of increasingly frequent and extreme flooding to motivate more people to demand action on global heating. We've chosen to focus on extreme flooding because its links with the climate crisis, through changing rainfall patterns, rising sea levels, and increased storminess, are simpler and more direct when compared with other elements of climate change. And also, of course, in the UK, currently, we are feeling the damaging effects of extreme flooding more than other climate change effects. We believe the Deepwater project is timely because we can use it to influence some crucial political events in 2021. For example, the next reading of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill in March, then the local council elections in May or June, and then finally the international COP26 gathering in Glasgow in November. In planning the Deepwater project, we've reached the stage now when we need to involve lots more Midlands rebels and local XR groups to make it work effectively. So we are appealing to you and your local group to get involved now, please, and contribute to planning and coordinating flooding-related actions across the Midlands. We are especially keen to hear from rebels who would be willing to act as deep water coordinators, to be the links, for example, between local XR groups and our Midlands outreach team. And there's only a few of us in that team. As Midlands outreach coordinators, we don't want to prescribe the details of Deepwater's methods and actions. That is for local groups to decide according to their local situations and their resources. But we are keen to fulfil a supporting and coordinating role. We envisage some or all of the following elements will be the basis for a Midlands-wide approach, but it's all subject to debate. Firstly, an awareness raising and action planning webinar for rebels about Deepwater. Then public and virtual events and actions, especially linked to the CEE bill and local elections, etc. Thirdly, awareness raising in the media about flooding and its links to the climate crisis. Fourth, collaboration with local flood action groups and other environmental groups outside XR. Fifth, presentations of a heading for extinction type talk, like the one we presented at this meeting. And finally, a single day or weekend of coordinated Midlands-wide flooding action. so long as any of that is possible given the COVID restrictions that we live under currently. So if you can offer some time and energy to help make all this happen, I urge you please to sign up via the form that we can provide, please. And if you can, please join us for future Zoom meetings to reflect on the meeting we've had tonight and to continue planning actions as far as restrictions allow. Also, we've now got a dedicated Deepwater email address that we can make available. We believe Deepwater could be massive, especially if we experience more extreme flooding this winter as predicted. If it proves successful in the Midlands, we know there is already interest in promoting it more widely in the UK and beyond. And finally, I want to thank you, everyone here, for attending and contributing this evening. And thanks too to my fellow Deepwater rebels, Kevin, Kim, Linda, Michael, Peter and Tim, for making all this happen so smoothly and inspiringly. Thank you.